want to open with one of my very favorite quotes. It's a really important, it's been an important one in my journey. It's by Rainer Maria Rilke from his book, Letters to a Young Poet. And it was written in 1903. The book was published in 1903, but I think it still speaks very strongly to us. And this is what he had to say. I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves, as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answers. Questions. Questions are so important. And it kind of strikes me as odd that when questions are so important, when the questions we ask are so important, that all through school we are tested on our answers. It wasn't until I got to university that they really taught me how to question. And even then I was still tested on the answers. And I think that means that we as a people, we feel we need to have the answers, and we need to have them yesterday. But questions are so important. And the questions that we have in our lives are often the things that define us more than the answers we find. The questions like, am I happy? Is this good for me? Is this good for them? What have I done? Can I make it right? How can I help them? What can I do? Why am I here? Why is it so hard? These are questions, just a few of the questions that walk with us every single day. And yet we want to rush by them and find an answer. We want to know. We want to get past the uncertainty. And yet, the questions themselves are gifts. And we can learn to live with them with grace. Now, I sent you home last week with homework. Can you believe it? A minister that sends you with homework? And I encouraged you to read and be with the Transfiguration story over and over and over and over this week. Now, I'm not going to ask you for a show of hands how many did it, but you know, the reason I invited that is because last week I said, it's not my job to give you the answers all boxed up and tied with a bow. That may have been the focus of the church for ages. It certainly was when I grew up, right? It was like there was a line to be drawn and you needed to toe it. But what I learned in my growing as a spiritual person and in accompanying other people is that the answers come to us in our spiritual life when we are darn good and ready for them, and not 1 minute sooner. And half of what we do as people of faith is learn how to live those questions with integrity and authenticity, how to open our hearts and our lives to the questions we have. And so, we're going to talk about questions today. And the question we've been asking, of course, for the last 6 weeks is, who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? Who is he? And last week is, you know, we were given that image of the Transfiguration and all of the stuff going on around that. And I invited you to just be in wonder with it. To not try to analyze it, figure it out, or pull it apart. Just be in that moment with those awestruck disciples and be present. And let the wonder be with you. Well, the same way with wonder comes questions, right? Because when we ask a question, we say, I wonder, right? Questions. So today, we're going to talk about another question and where the answers lie that we can live into. So we're going to turn to Matthew 16, and we're going to start with this first verse, or verse 13. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Now, I would like to highlight that this was probably not a question where Jesus was wondering what people thought of him so that he could know whether he was doing okay or not. Right? Because one of the things we've really learned over the last few weeks, we've really kind of touched on over and over again, is that Jesus' purpose and well-being was grounded in his relationship to God. So he's not checking in to see whether he's okay. He's checking in because he's curious what people are saying about him, or he's checking in to offer his disciples a lesson, but he's checking in. And he says, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Now, just a minute. Don't go any further with this yet. If somebody said to you, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" what would you say? I don't need you to answer, but I want you to think of it. What would you say? And so his disciples offered some answers. Some say John the Baptist. So John the Baptist was the opening act, right? We talked about him. He had been drawing huge crowds to the riverside to hear his message and be baptized. And he was the one freshest in the community's mind. So some are saying he's John the Baptist. Some are saying Elijah. So we've also learned in the last few weeks that Elijah was linked, the arrival of Elijah was linked with the coming Messiah that people had been longing for. So some are saying John the Baptist, some are saying Elijah, and others are saying Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So these prophets, Jeremiah and all the rest of the prophets, were the voice for God. So these are all very positive statements. I mean, this is what people are saying. They don't know. They're wondering, and they're guessing, right? The people out there are guessing. And they're saying he may be John the Baptist, he might be Elijah, he might be Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. So then, Jesus said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Now, I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think that if we were asked that, we would be perhaps so caught up in trying to get the right answer that we wouldn't answer. Maybe not. I think there are some very bold people who might come forward. And guess who answers? Can you guess? Peter, right? Because Peter can't keep his mouth shut. And he gets it right for once. He was probably really happy about that. Either he was happy to have an answer, or he just couldn't keep his mouth shut. Peter is just that guy, right? He is the baffle all the way through the Gospels. Peter's the one. Sometimes he gets it really right, and sometimes not so much. But Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." He nails it bang on. He nails it from what he's heard. He nails it from what he's seen. He nails it from what he knows in his heart. He just nails it. You are the Messiah, Son of the living God. Because that's what he's seen, right? That Jesus' whole identity rests in his relationship to God. And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Blessed are you." Because he got it right. And he goes on and he says, "For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." Now, when I was growing up and we were doing Bible studies, I was taught by my mom, always pay attention to the but in the Bible. Because when it says but, something important is coming after. Right? "For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." Peter's answer didn't come from Peter. This wasn't a thing from up here. Peter's answer came from the Spirit at work in his life. This was a gift to him. And that's really important for us to be aware of, that it didn't come from his brain. It came from God. And this is important because Jesus goes on to say, "And I tell you, you are Peter." He gives him a new name. He gives him a new name, and he gives him a name that has meaning, which means he gives him a new identity, right? Now, just as back then, if we change our names, it's a significant business. "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Now, the challenge with this particular passage is that Peter, or Cephas, can also be translated as rock. So there is this tendency to say, Jesus is saying, "I'm going to build my church on you." But I think from the previous verse, what he's saying is, on your understanding of who I am given to you by God, I'm going to build my church. Right? Peter has embodied that right way of knowing Christ by listening to the Spirit. So he says, Jesus says, "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or hell, will not prevail against it." What does that mean? Well, these are the things. Death will not prevail against his church. Sin will not prevail against his church. All of the things we're ashamed of will not prevail against the church. All of the things that we think separate us from God will not prevail against the church. All of those things that are spiritual death in our lives will not prevail against the church. That's the church that Jesus is saying will be built on the God-given understanding that Peter had of who he was. And so we go on. He goes on. Now you really need to pay attention to this, because this is for us. Right? These are promises for us. So, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." As members of that church, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Jesus has been talking about the kingdom of heaven. His whole time on earth was helping us to understand this really mysterious, amazing, forward-looking vision of a people, of a world built on justice and equality and fairness, where there's hope and peace and joy and love for all people. And he says, "I'm going to give you the keys to that. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven." So first there's a promise, and then there's a challenge. Okay? Because this means that what fits for us is okay. What doesn't fit for us is important to help us negotiate. And we have seen some churches do really cringy things. You know, our history, not just some churches, but our history as a United Church also has stuff in our history that we took on as things that needed to be bound or stopped. We were involved in the residential schools. We got it wrong, and we've since apologized for it. So this is a challenge and a responsibility. But he goes on to say, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And that's why it's really important for us to ask, who are we as a body? Who are we as people of Christ? What did Christ loose on the earth? What did Jesus set free on the earth? Because we're part of the kingdom of heaven coming into being right here and now. That's that mysterious someday, but right now place that we live in as believers. And so it's important that we understand what is to be bound and what is to be loosed. And we're not going to figure that out up here any more than Peter figured out who Jesus was up here. I mean, our brains are part of it, but it's part of opening our lives to what God's doing. So anyways, Jesus said, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then, after all this, he sternly ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Why? Why? I don't know. This is one of those sentences that bewilders me every time I see it. There's a big revelation, and then Jesus says, shh. He heals someone, he says, don't tell anybody. You know? But as I was thinking about this whole thing about questions, and these questions that are important, I realized that maybe what he was trying to keep people away from was labels. Because labels remove our need to question, don't they? Labels kind of let us settle into what we think we know. And as long as people didn't know who he was, they had to keep asking. Right? So this passage goes right on the heels of the question we've been asking, who is this Jesus? And it brings home the fact that we are called to participate in the asking of questions. And we're supposed to be asking ourselves, who do I say that Jesus is? And the only way we're going to find that out is by spending time in the Word of God, spending time in the Bible, exploring the stories of people who have shared their experience of Jesus, and asking ourselves lots of questions about those. The only way we're going to find answers is by holding the questions and trusting them. Because just like Peter, who didn't get to his answer on his own, we as individuals and we as the church will not get to our answers, to the right answers, to the answers that are life-giving and heartfelt and worthy of sharing on our own. We'll get there because the Spirit is at work in our lives, and we've invited God to be part of that. So, I asked you to do that homework last week, and I hope that it stirred up some questions, and I hope that today has stirred up some questions. What I want you to do is I want you to sit with that. Who do I say Jesus is? And then I want to give you some hints, right, about how to live that question. Pay attention to the times you've experienced God at work in your life. Pay attention to the times that you've prayed and had answers, either yes or no. Pay attention to the life that you've lived, the moments of joy and the moments of difficulty. Pay attention, because you don't get to share my understanding of Jesus. You have to be able to share your own. And just as Jesus' presence in the world was grounded in his relationship to God, his identity as the Messiah was as the Son of God, in the same way we, as individuals and as a body, must be grounded in our relationship with God through Christ, and allow the Spirit to make that real to us. Because we have a responsibility. We are kingdom makers. We've been given the keys of the kingdom, and we had better be paying attention, because we're supposed to be part of making justice and equality and peace and goodness happen in a world that doesn't seem very set up for that. So live your questions, the spiritual questions, the questions of your lives. Live them well. Live them in the presence of God, knowing that you're never alone with them. And you will be led to the answers. We will be led to the answers. And we will be the people that God would have us be, both in our own individual lives and as a body. We're going to take some time in silence to reflect on everything you've experienced so far in the service. And then Nathan's going to bring us out of that with music. So, time for silence.